Hi, I'm Rajiv, and today I am with Chelsea Miller, who is a knife maker. Chelsea, I'm so pleased to be here today and to meet someone that makes knives. It's something that I don't know anything about.
Absolutely, it's so great to have you here.
Thank you. Can I ask first where you learned how to make knives?
Yeah, I learned from my father, who was not a knife maker, but he was a blacksmith and a carpenter. And essentially what I learned first was just the resourcefulness and looking at objects and imagining something else from him. So I spent a lot of time just kind of experimenting and playing around in his shop, and knives kind of magically found their way to me from that process.
Wow. So was that at a young age?
Yeah, I started working in his shop as a little kid, mainly sweeping the floor and making little hooks and hinges in the forge. But it wasn't until my mid-20s when I actually really started playing around and becoming more curious and more brave to bend and break and shape metal that came about.
Wow. And then what was the transition from doing that as a hobby or as a pastime to actually turning it into a career?
Well, you know, I never set out with an intention that it would be a career. He became very ill when I was in my 20s, and I spent some time just being at home with him to be there through that process and kind of just work on my relationship to what was about to happen. He eventually passed, but I would just make things for fun and just to be kind of a meditative, creative state, and then give them away to my friends. And it was really the response of my friends saying, "What is this crazy thing? You really ought to sell these." That then I decided to take out a booth at the Brooklyn Flea and start actually presenting them to a wider network. And the response just grew in such a positive way that it allowed me to have my first shop in New York that led to another shop that led to collaborations, that led to meeting chefs, and it just really grew organically from that.
Can we talk about what we see
Yeah, absolutely.
in front of us? These are all things that Chelsea has made. Maybe let's start with these over here.
Sure. Yeah, this is, so my mother, she studied macrobiotics. So when we were growing up, we grew everything that we ate. We were entirely pretty much living off the land. And she had this amazing collection of knives from around the world from before she and my father built this little homestead in Vermont. And so she always had a specific knife for everything she was doing in the kitchen. And so I always loved the idea of having something small and having something large. And so this knife I make, and I use this as a fruit knife or a vegetable knife in the kitchen. It's very petite, it's very small, but also can be used as a dinner knife. So this can be used at the table as well. So it can be used as a steak knife or for cutting fruit and vegetables.
They're so beautiful. And this knife here.
This knife is my traditional chef knife style. So this is a German style, which means it has a long heel and kind of a straight blade and then a little bit of a tip that creates some versatility. So you're really using it to chop larger pieces and then the tip for doing finer small work. And I like this style knife the most because I feel like it's the most versatile. I can use it for everything.
Now, do you make these knives just sort of a generic size, or do you custom make knives?
I absolutely customize for everyone that I work with. Yeah, like this one, for example, is made for a chef friend of mine who is a very large man. So this is a much larger handle than I personally use for myself.
So this handle was made to fit his hand?
Yeah. Oftentimes I have clients send me a piece of wood from a tree that fell in their backyard, or maybe a piece of a log that's been sitting in their basement from their grandparents, or a mechanic's rasp or a horseshoe file that they've had in a tool bag that was handed down for generations, and there's not really much application or use for it in their daily life now, but they can send that material to me and I can turn it into something that they're then using on a daily basis. Then it's the reconnection to something from their past that now is present in their present day.
You mentioned a mechanic's rasp. Is that where this patterning comes from?
Yes, this is specifically a horseshoe rasp for filing horses' hooves. And when I grew up, my father, he was a carpenter and couldn't afford a tractor at the time. So we had two workhorses, Belgian horses.
When you were growing up?
Yeah. Every night in the summertime, we'd go for a wagon ride. Every night in the winter, we'd go for a sleigh ride. And during the day, my dad would be pulling logs and trees out of the woods with the horses. The horses were super happy. They had a good life.
What were their names?
There was Bucky, Cokie, and Helen, but we called Helen Hellion because she's a little crazy. But yeah, these files just live in a bucket, like very rusty in the corner. And when I first started making knives, my dad pointed to that bucket of rusting materials, like, have at it. So it's really become my material of choice since then.
Is this one of those from your dad's
Yeah.
bucket? Really? I just made the assumption that you put this patterning in,
Right.
like that you did this.
Right.
I had no idea that this is the remnant of a tool.
I leave that on there not only as a reminder of where it came from, but it can be functional in the kitchen. So it can be used for grating nutmeg or zesting a lemon or a lime. So it becomes a multifunctional tool.
That's lovely. Now this right here, what's this right here?
This is just something I make for fun. This is from another can in my father's workshop of rusting materials. It has a triangular shape to get in between the teeth of a chainsaw, but I really love the little shape of it and how dainty and small it is. So I often feel that any discarded piece of metal, as long as you put a wooden handle on it, becomes something super elevated.
Wow, it's lovely. This right here?
This is a mechanic's rasp.
Yes.
So this would be used, you'd be under a car filing metal pieces to fit into place before you weld them. So it has, again, it has a rasp material. This one is a softer, gentler material that would be for finishing, and this one has a rougher material that would be for creating a shape. But I just thought it would be so beautiful to attach a wooden handle to it. It's kind of a surprise. And I use it as a nutmeg grinder. So I just hold it in my hand and grate some nutmeg.
It feels really nice. Like, it has a great, you've made it to really fit into the palm in a very pleasing way.
Well, that's something that I find really exciting about working with wood, is that wood is so forgiving and it really loves to just give way to the way that you want to use it. Metal is the complete opposite. Metal wants to have its way with you. Like metal wants you to listen to what it wants to become, but wood really is very gentle and wants to take your direction. So I think marrying those two often creates this beautiful tension.
I love that. I've been making pottery with someone named Guy Wolf, who's a flower pot. Mainly he makes flower pots in Connecticut. And I've been going to him for off and on for 13 years. And from the very beginning, he has always said that when you're working with these materials, you do have to listen to them.
Yes.
Because if you really think about them, but really listen to the feel, it will kind of tell you. He's saying it in a very beautiful, philosophical way, but there is a technical truth to it.
Yes.
Sometimes I'll be doing something and he'll say, no, like look at the way you're scratching into the clay. It looks rough, and it's because it's too dry and it doesn't want that.
Yes.
So I've really learned from him, like showing me exactly what you said, that you can fight it.
Yes.
You can form it into a shape, but that often results in something that's not pretty and that doesn't feel good. Whereas someone who buys this or who owns this from you, they might not know why, but I can just feel like holding it, it feels very pleasing.
It's
really
all
beautiful.
about harmony. I mean, I have to be the one that's the steward. I have to be the one that shows up. And I think there is actually a lot that is required in that. Like I have to make sure that before I go into the workshop, I'm in the right state of mind, which is being very receptive to the materials and also just committing to being safe and slow, but really listening to what's happening with the material and creating harmony. Because I think with any art, it's less about the artist and more about the materials and what the materials want to say. It's like a sculptor looking at a block of marble. You are finding what is it within. You're not necessarily telling it what to be, because you'll find as soon as you start to push your ego in there and tell it what to be, it doesn't necessarily want to meet you in harmony.
Yeah. That takes many, many, many years, I think, to discover. Like I've been working with clay for 20 years, and it's really only in the last 3 that I've understood that.
Do you notice a difference in the finished piece? Whether
Absolutely.
you like it more, or gives you more beauty, or has a different energy?
I feel like the word that I always use is when it's done serving the material, the finished piece is always singing.
Yes.
Like it's always like you look at the thing, and even though it's a static object, it just feels like it's like singing. That's the only way that I could say it.
I can relate to that.
See that in these.
I often feel that when people ask you the steps of knife making and the very technical aspects of knife making, yes, there is a lot of technicality and there's a lot of things that you have to be very precise about. But oftentimes when people ask me, well, how do you know you've got the right angle, or how do you know when it's done? I know by the sound that it makes on the specific machine. I know that the sound that it makes when it's ready, when it's singing.
These right here, these are completely wood.
These are completely wood. So these are all made from wood on the farm where I grew up. My father passed, but there's enough wood for many, many, many projects beyond even my lifetime. So I'm always finding fun ways to utilize a lot of that wood. And this I call Mom's favorite sauté fork.
It's beautiful. And this is so delicate.
This, I often like to, especially for cooking tools and working with wood, it's such a fun practice to get away from the demands of the metal and just work a little bit with wood. In that sort of practice of just, without thinking, just playing with the wood, I come up with these kind of unique cooking tools that I love. I love feminine shapes, and something that I think sets my knives apart from other knife makers are those kind of feminine lines and shapes and fluidity and movement. And so working with wood, that's very easy to accomplish.
You have these for sale?
Yes.
Okay, good. Someone's going home with one tonight. Well, Chelsea, this has been fascinating. Would you be able to show us how one of these knives are made?
Absolutely.
Please.
Are you ready to get dirty?
Yes, I have my coveralls on. So
It would be my pleasure.
thank you. So here we are in Chelsea's workshop where the knives are actually made. Where do we start, Chelsea?
Well, I'm so glad to have you here in my little laboratory. Where we would start is with the raw materials themselves. And these I've collected from farms, from clients, from antique shops. And we'll begin with a horseshoe rasp.
If you were at an antique store or like a yard sale and there was a box of tools, if you're sorting through the different files, are there some that you would choose over others?
Yeah, actually, I would always go for the older file, the oldest possible.
Yeah.
And that's just because a lot of the material that's older has been less blended with other metals, so it's easier to know what the actual compound is. So the older the material, the more true it's going to be as, you know, a traditional high carbon steel. So we take this, draw out our desired shape, and then either we put it in the forge, so we heat the metal to a point where we can manipulate it with a hammer. So with each blow of the hammer, we'll be spreading the metal forward. Or we take a quicker route, which is to cut it with plasma. I have a plasma cutter that just cuts through this as if it's butter.
Okay.
I'm going to show you both.
Okay, great. I'm excited. This is your forge.
This is my forge.
Heated with propane.
Yes, and this is actually a farrier's forge. So this is something that a farrier would just travel around with, maybe in the back of their van or their truck. So it's super portable, and it's also so well insulated that it's quite safe to be using indoors or to have in their van or their truck.
So this would be used for shaping horseshoes?
Yeah, exactly.
Wow. When I worked at this historic site, we had a blacksmith shop, and our forge was powered with coal.
Oh yeah.
And we had a bellows.
Oh, beautiful.
And when I was working in the blacksmith shop, I'd have to pump the bellows. And after 4 pumps, I was like, really? Every time I'm gonna have to pump these huge.
Like breathing.
Yes. To create a flame that was hot enough for the iron. I think it lasted just a few days in there, and I was like, I don't want to work in this building anymore. It's physically, blacksmithing was historically, physically so much work.
Oh yes, you'll see, my father was a blacksmith, and his one arm was just enormous.
Did he have a bellows?
Yeah. So
he did?
Yeah, he had a coal forge like that, so it was built inside his shop, and we'd, put the charcoal on and have to work the bellows. We had a foot pedal for the bellows, so it wasn't too labor intensive.
Wow.
But yeah, it's a long process. It's back and forth, and it takes a long time for you to actually see any progress.
Yes.
Yeah, and then suddenly it starts to take shape. When I was working in my dad's shop at the forge, it's not something you just go and forge for an hour. It's like a whole day's process. Getting up in the morning, preparing the forge, maintaining it, keeping it hot throughout the day, and then a whole process of setting it down afterwards. So this is very modern and comes in very handy of just, okay, I have 20 minutes, I'll go forge something out real quick.
Yeah. I love that you learned the old way. You must have a real appreciation for being able to do this so conveniently now. Because
to be honest, I think I would prefer that style and to do it in that way. But obviously, I need a place that is not temporary,
Yeah.
to be able to do that. So I love actually going home and working in my family's shop.
Is it still there?
It is, yeah. My brother works in there now.
Wow.
Ooh, this is looking good.
Now, when you're checking, what are you looking for? The color of the metal?
Yes, if you peek in here,
Yep.
you'll see that it's starting to turn a real bright, glowing orange. Are we ready?
Yes.
Here we go. Woo!
Wow.
You'll see how it'll lose that color fairly quickly. That's it cooling off. And so you only have a finite time of when it's hot enough to actually manipulate. But you'll see that it is, with every blow, it is boop, 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 inching forward a little bit. All right, we're ready to go. And every time I hit it, it'll bend it. So the next time I want to hit it on the opposite side to bend it back. And that'll just help keep it straight as I go along. Do you want to try?
Okay.
All right, we're ready. So I'll put this on the anvil, and then you just hit it in the middle. Yeah. Here, and I'll flip it and do the other side. Amazing! Wow, this makes my job a lot easier.
Okay. Weren't there blacksmith shops with multiple people too?
Yes.
Where they did this?
Yes.
Like,
4 hands are better than 2.
it's fun.
Let's go again.
Okay.
Good job, knife maker.
Thank you. That was fun. Kind of scary.
It is a little scary.
Red hot metal.
So, do a little plasma cutting.
Where should I stand?
You can stand anywhere behind me, I'd say. You're
Okay.
safe and you'll have a good view from there.
Okay. And we wear these to
Yes.
protect our eyes from the light?
Yes, because it's very, very, very bright.
Okay. Oh, they're green. Everything has turned green. Wow. I mean, it was sort of cutting it like it's plastic.
I know, it's like it's butter. It's really amazing. So now that we've cut this out on the plasma cutter, we'll then take this shape to the bench grinder where we'll use a process called stock removal. So instead of forging, instead of moving the metal forward, we'll just be removing material from this piece. And the reason that I use stock removal as opposed to forging is that by moving the metal forward, I would lose that rasp texture.
Oh.
So what I want to do with the bench grinder and the stock removal is only remove stock where I want it to be removed.
Okay.
So you have these turned
Oh! They're not supposed to be worn this way. I've been told they're supposed to be worn this way.
See, this doesn't look nearly as hilarious.
Now it feels so much more comfortable.
Sorry.
Oh, that's okay.
So this is the bench grinder. So this is where I performed most of the stock removal. Hours of removing material with the grinding stone. So I'll fire it up and show you.
Okay.
So you can see every pass that you take removes a little bit of the material. So what I'm trying to do is just create a steady pattern across the entire piece, layer by layer by layer, which ends up feeling like I'm not really making very much progress for quite a long time. But that's essentially the process. I'd love to have you feel what this is like if you want to.
Okay.
What I would recommend is the most important thing is to keep your fingers as far from the stone as possible.
Okay.
So even if you just stand here and apply pressure, kind of have a feel for that tension. And I'll do it first. Let's do it here and here. Yeah. Great.
Wow. So So Chelsea, this is the version that we have once we've taken it off the grinder, removing material in a sort of crude way.
Yes.
And now we're here at the, what is this called?
This is called the bench sander.
And that's the next step you would do?
That's the next step, and this gives us much more control. We're still removing a lot of the material from either side, but it gives us a lot more control in making the material even. So this is, like you said, very crude. It creates these ruts in the blade. So this is a process of smoothing that out as we remove more material.
Is this like sandpaper?
This is sandpaper. So this is a very thick grit. This is a 36 grit.
Okay.
So that'll be the roughest belt that we use. And we'll go through a series of many, many belts that become thinner and thinner so that we can create a more refined blade and then eventually create an edge with that finest belt. Already see we've dispensed with a lot of the ruts that were created by the grinder, but it gives us an easier guideline as to how far we need to go, and we can do it much more evenly.
So your aim is to go down to a completely flat level surface.
So once we've taken this down on the belts, we'll get to a point where it's time to attach a handle. So then we'll go back to the raw materials and find a piece of wood that either has been gifted to us from a client, or we just feel like, should this have a walnut handle or should it have a maple handle? What does this want to be?
But you would only put the handle on once the blade has been like created to perfection. Okay.
I will do a final sharpening, but the blade must be complete, and then I will heat treat it. So I'll put it in an oven at a certain temperature for a certain amount of time, which brings all the carbon back into its original state, which creates the hardest, most stable version of this blank, and then I'll apply the handle.
Because you can't put that wood into an oven and heat treat the metal with the wood on it.
Exactly.
I see. So this needs to be done before the handle goes on.
Yes.
Okay, before we talk about handles, I spotted some stuff on your workbench, which
Oh yeah?
this is going to be me being nosy that I just want to ask you about. 'Cause
Sure.
They're so beautiful.
I don't have any secrets.
Okay, well I do. Look at this little thing is so beautiful. What are you like? Can you tell us about this? What?
Sure. So this, I used to make a lot of these when I was just playing with found materials. I don't make so many of these. It's similar to the ones that we were holding on the counter earlier, which are small vegetable and fruit knives or dinner knives. This one I kind of consider more like jewelry in a sense. It's kind of a, just here you go ahead. It's just like a version of your own hand and your finger.
It feels like, can I buy this from you?
Well, I actually have, here's what it will look like. I have another version that actually has a handle on it.
What?
Yeah, they're really tiny. Some of these pieces, I don't make them with the intention that they have a certain purpose. The purpose is kind of for you to discover.
This just aesthetically feels so delicate. This is one of the moments where if I'm running through all the knives I've ever used in my whole life, like kitchen knives, there's never been a knife that has meaning. But here is the opportunity to replace a kitchen knife, a ubiquitous kitchen knife that has no meaning, with one that has like very deep meaning, because I've met you and I've seen this process. And this is not a plug to sell Chelsea's knives. It really isn't. But and I say this because I want to convince other people to make that investment in their lives with anything: bed sheets, towels, knives, pillows, grocery bags, like find versions that have some meaning, and every single day when you pick them up and you use them, like if this comes home with me, every single time I use it, inherently I will be, even for a tiny millisecond, brought back to this moment right here.
Yeah.
Like the experiential value of something. It's totally worth it. Okay, these are, sorry, I had to stop the flow because I spotted these and became like Gollum, like precious. So here's a blank that would get a handle, and here's the version with the handle put on.
So now this just needs some final sanding to remove the excess glue, and then a little sharpening.
And then it would be done?
Yeah.
Shall we go back to our large version?
Yes. Now is the time for us to try and decide how we want this to look and feel. So I generally only use wood that is local to the area.
Really?
So I use like off-cut pieces from furniture makers in Brooklyn. So oftentimes they use Pennsylvania, walnut, and then all of the maple and the apple comes from my family's property in Vermont.
Apple?
Apple.
Apple wood handles?
Do I have any apple here? I think I do have some apple.
So the handles have story behind them.
Yeah.
So how do you go from a rough piece of wood to the handle?
I just decide whether or not it's going to have a light handle, a dark handle, apple handle, maple handle, and then I call this kind of wood figure wood, which means that it has characteristics in the grain that have interest. This is what I use a lot. This is called spalted maple. And the spalting is just moisture that's traveled along the grain of a very, very blonde wood and then been frozen there in these wild patterns that look like you've actually taken a marker in there and intricately drawn them.
Spalted maple.
Spalted maple. And a lot of things can be spalted. Spalting is that process of the moisture being frozen into the grain.
Wow. It's what we might consider like a flaw.
Yeah.
It's doing something bad to the
Right.
wood, but it results in this beautiful, unusual grain.
Spalting is basically just rotting.
Yeah.
It's slowly decaying. And I don't know, like who's to say that is good or bad? It's just part of the process.
Yeah.
And very beautiful. And I love this, how sometimes there are very like bubbly, swirly little bits, and then sometimes there are just long straight lines. So with this piece, you could see how you could just have a long straight line. So I could see that having a long straight line. But equally, I think it would look amazing with something, you know, that has like little lines and bubbles.
Okay.
So what we would do is just trace the portion of the wood we'd like to appear as the handle. What do you think, bubbly or straight line?
I really like the idea of this straight line running
Yeah.
down the middle.
I like that too.
Is that okay, or do,
Oh, yeah.
or do you have to be considerate of the direction of the grain?
So
like,
you would be considerate of the direction of the grain. So these I've pre-cut all to be in the length and the shape of a handle.
okay,
So we'll just trace that there. Great.
okay.
Let's cut her out. Go. And so, of course, we chose our desired piece, but sometimes you end up finding something even better. Whoa, inside.
A surprise on the inside. So you're saying that maybe we would decide at this point that we're going to use these on the outside? We can?
It all depends on what you prefer, but my preference is always to bookend with the same piece on
Yes.
either side. So my preference would be to use those as the outside that mirror one another. You never really know. Sometimes you can open it and there's really no figuring going on at all. But that came out kind of amazing.
So once the handle is cut out and finished, it'll look like this.
Here's one that has been glued already. So this just needs the glue to be cleaned up and final sanding to create the shape of the handle.
Let's talk about that. So we have, because this is something that I've always wanted to know. We have our blank. You've put holes in the actual metal, and then you have just the roughly shaped wooden pieces.
Yes.
And then what are these?
These are brass pins. So you can use any kind of pin. You could use stainless steel pin, you could use a brass pin. When I first started knife making, I was using brazing rods, which are a mixture of brass and other material, just because it's what I had on hand. But you can also use something called a mosaic pin, which is when someone has actually crafted a really ornate little tube that would then become like a little jewel in those spots.
So the wood goes on, the pegs go through, it's all glued up. I can see here it's kind of like crude at this point.
Yeah.
And then what do you do to take this down to shape it?
We take it back to the same tool that we use to refine the blade, and we start to work on the handle with that same tool, same process.
Oh, it did it again.
Ready?
Yep. It's not only taking down the wood, it will take down the metal too?
Yeah, so what I'm doing is just removing the glue from the metal. So I'm not actually removing very much metal, but when the sparks are flying, that's when it's making contact with the metal.
Okay, so it's really, it will take everything off evenly, which is what creates this smooth, seamless transition from wood to metal?
Yes, and that's why I actually kind of like the more crude glue up, where there's excess handle and lots of glue, just to know that I've made a really secure bond. And then when I start to remove the excess material, I've gone down a layer where it's really adhered.
Wow.
And you can see here too, like the original pattern of the rasp shows up in the epoxy.
In all of my trips to junk shops and thrift shops and antique sales and yard sales and farmyards, I've seen many files, and I never ever would have thought that something like this paired with something like this could be turned into something so beautiful and useful as this. So Chelsea, thanks so much for having us here today and for showing us how you make these works of art, really.
Oh, it was my pleasure. And now you know how to make one on your own.
Well, I don't think I'll be making one on my own, but if anyone out there wants to find out more about what you do, or maybe even purchase one of your knives, how can they do that?
You can find me at my website, chelseamillerknives.com, and also on Instagram at chelseamillerknives.
And there is a waiting list. So Chelsea is very much in demand. Thanks so much for having us,
You're
Chelsea.
so very welcome.